Everyone, thank you for joining us. So we're going to have more of a geological presentation today. We'll talk about source rocks, and I think it was in lesson number 2 where I showed the little diagram here, the elements that we need for a successful hydrocarbon field. We need source rocks, we need hydrocarbon migration, and then we need a combination of a reservoir rock with a trapping geometry and an overlying sealing lithology to keep the hydrocarbons in place. So today we'll focus in on source or source rocks. So before we talk about that, let me define what a petroleum system is. A petroleum system includes where the petroleum originates from, how it accumulates, and how it got from its source to its trap. So for an example, there's a petroleum system in the North Viking Graben, which is offshore Norway. Oil and gas are generated from the Upper Jurassic Draupne Formation, and then it migrates into Upper Jurassic Brent Formation fluvial sands, where there are rotated extensional fault blocks forming significant traps. A petroleum system has 4 essential elements and 2 main processes that I'll show on the next slide. So the essential elements, we need to have a source rock, we need to have a reservoir rock, we need to have sealing rocks, and we need to have overburden or burial so that the source can start to generate hydrocarbon and those molecules of oil and gas can migrate into the trap. The processes, we need trap formation, and then in terms of the hydrocarbon itself, the hydrocarbons have to be generated, then they have to migrate, and then they have to accumulate within the reservoir rock. And I should mention that this is what is true for conventional plays. I'll talk a little bit about unconventional or resource plays a little later in this lecture. So we're going to focus in on source rocks today, and I'll also be talking about hydrocarbon generation. So the source of oil and gas is organic material that can be rearranged from plants or animals. We need reaction conditions, we need geologic time, we need depth of burial, and we need temperature. And so if we have organic material and it has the right conditions, it will start to generate molecules of oil and molecules of gas. For the organic matter, it has to be produced, and that's going to be in plants or in animals or critters, as the slide says. In order for plants or animals to grow, they need nutrients and they need the proper growing conditions. And so I'm not going to go through with the rest of the stuff on the slide. The organic matter is the material that we are interested in. There's 2 other factors. We have to have concentration of the organic matter, and a source rock will have at least 1% by weight organic material. So if I have 100 grams of a rock sample and 1 out of the 100 grams is organic material, that would have a 1% TOC, total organic carbon. In order to have the concentration of organic material, typically we want to look for places that have a low input from river systems or other terrigenous sediments. The organic matter also has to be preserved. That means that we don't want to have a lot of oxidation, and so environments in which oxygen content is low is favorable for the formation of high quality organic material. So we look for places where there might be an oxygen minimum or where we might have stagnant waters. With anoxic environments, that means that the oxygen available to decompose the organic material is reduced in some fashion. On the left, if this is a water column in an ocean or in a lake, the photic zone, we have a lot of organic material being produced. It dies, it starts to sink. We can get a place where the amount of oxygen reaches a minimum, almost down to 0. And this would be where, if the organic material got buried, it would have a more likely chance to be preserved. When we have a continental margin, there'll be an anoxic zone, and so organic material that subsides to the seafloor and is buried fairly rapidly in an anoxic zone would lead to very good source rock. There are also certain periods of geological time when we've had mass extinctions, and that would improve the ability for organic material to be preserved. We can split organic material into three types. Type 1 is algal remains, hopefully deposited under anoxic conditions, so it gets concentrated. This commonly happens in deep lakes. And type 1 organic material will generate a waxy crude oil. Type 2 organic material is planktonic and bacterial remains. These are marine critters. Again, if the environment is anoxic, low in oxygen, we have a better chance to preserve it. And type 2 organic material will generate both oil and gas. And then type 3 is terrestrial or land-based plant matter. It is decomposed by bacteria and fungi. Again, if it is suboxic conditions, that improves the chance that it will be preserved. And type 3 organic material tends to generate gas with a little bit of light oil. The properties that we associate with a source rock is the total organic content, TOC. And as I mentioned before, that's a weight % of organic material within a given sample of rock. If a rock has greater than 1% total organic carbon, then it's considered to be a potential source rock. We do have some source rocks that have over 15% total organic carbon, and these would be world-class source rocks. The second property of source rocks that we worry about is the hydrogen index, and that's the amount of total hydrocarbon relative to the amount of hydrocarbon that is tied up in water within the rock sample. Hydrogen index, HI, is a key factor in the response of a neutron porosity log. So the neutron porosity log is one of the tools that geochemists love to have run in a well because that will help them understand and appreciate what the hydrogen index is of potential source intervals. We need more than high total organic carbon. We need the raw material to be buried, and then we need the chemical reaction to occur that's going to convert plant remains and animal remains into hydrocarbon molecules. Temperature is the primary control on the chemical reaction, and so we have to bury it and then have enough heat in order to kick in that particular geochemical reaction. Our geochemist friends have equations called Arrhenius equations, and those define how much organic material will be converted into oil and gas molecules given a burial and temperature history. The chart on the right talks about organic material from when it's living conditions until it's buried extremely deeply. First, we have the deposition of the organic material along with sediment grains. Diagenesis is where we compact the rocks. There'll be mild temperatures and pressures. The organic material turns into kerogen, which is a dewatered waxy material. If we continue to bury it and heat it up, we get into catagenesis, and that's the thermal degradation of kerogen to form hydrocarbon chains, oil molecules and gas molecules. As the temperature and depth of burial increases, the longer hydrocarbon chains, the oil, will be cracked to shorter and shorter hydrocarbon chains, eventually leading to only having gas. And then metagenesis is when hydrocarbon is driven off leaving residual carbon. So we have different zones. We have the diagenic zone, we have the catagenic zone, and the metagenic zone. There's a chart called a Van Krevelen diagram, and what we plot is the hydrogen to carbon ratio on the y-axis and the oxygen to carbon ratio on the x-axis. And in this cross plot, the different organic matter types, type 1, type 2, type 3, are split out. And we also get a feel for where it is in that change from kerogen to oil and to gas, and then to not generating any more oil or gas, being over mature. So if I had a sample and it plotted where the red dot is on this HC versus OC diagram, that would tell me that it's type 1 organic material and that it's about midway through the oil generation window. So the aqua color would be the oil generation window. The black coloring is indicating where the gas generation window would lie. One of the things that we can do with computers is we can model how basins have subsided and how different properties like temperature or hydrocarbon generation have occurred over geological time. That model can be done one-dimensionally. We can use a well location and model the burial, and I'll show an example of that in a couple of slides coming up. We can also have a pseudo well location, and by that I mean there's no actual well drilled at the location, but from our seismic interpretation of the seafloor and all the deeper horizons, we can model it as if we knew what the stratigraphy was. We can also model in 2 dimensions. We can make a cross section that intersects 2 or more wells and consider how that cross-sectional view has evolved over geological time to get to its present configuration. And then we can use a series of grids and model things in 3 dimensions as well. Our starting point is our present-day stratigraphy, and as I mentioned, that could come from well data, or it could come from seismic interpretation. What we'll do is we'll backstrip the present into past times. Another name for this type of analysis is geohistory, and I'll show an example of that. We can calibrate our models for temperature using present-day temperature data, and we can also use indicators of what hydrocarbon generation states we are in. And then once we've understood going back through time what some of the major controls on subsidence and temperature and pressure and other factors, we can then use the computer to model forward through time and figure out when things happen, such as when a particular source rocks would start to generate oil, when it would start to generate gas. So with Basin Modeling, we start with the present day, and here I show 4 layers. Brown is deposited on top of the orange, which is on yellow, which is on green. And through geohistory analysis, we can backstrip. I've removed the brown layer, put in the water depths that I think is associated with the top of orange time. Then I've taken off the orange layer, put in water depths I think is associated with the top of yellow time, take the yellow layer off and reconstruct what it looked like at the top of green time, then take green off and get an understanding as to what the basin configuration might have looked like 42 million years before it started to receive sediment. Once I've gone back through time, and I'm limited by the mapped horizons that I have with the different ages, I can generate a computer model that marches forward through geologic time, in this case perhaps starting at 42 million years ago, and use a time increment of my own choosing. So that might be 1 million years, it might be 250,000 years, it might be 2 million years. And as the computer models the basin through time, it can keep track of things such as temperature and pressure, and where the organic rich layers are, and when they would start to generate oil, when they would start to generate gas, and when they would be over mature. So we backstrip to get a burial history. We use existing stratigraphy. That would be age depth pairs from a well or age depth pairs from a seismic interpretation. We need the lithologic components of each layer, and we need some paleo data in order to get the ages of the different units and also to get an idea of what sort of water depths existed at the location back through time. Then the software allows us to backstep by progressively removing the top layer. We datum each time step based on either present day sea level, or if we feel sea level has changed through geological time, we can use a particular sea level curve that we like. We will model then how the basin has subsided and filled. And one of the options is to decompact the sediments as we move back through geological time. So we'll use a hypothetical well A here. This is the present day stratigraphy, a little bit of water depth. Then we have a hiatus from 0 to 30 million years. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 layers. And basement here would be 198 million years ago. So that's our present day stratigraphy. And we want to go back through geological time. So there's a geological time chart on the x-axis. We can put in paleo water depth, or at least our best estimates of that. This diagram has sea level being constant at today's position, but if you like the Hock et al. Sea level or some other sea level, the software allows you to use that. And then we backstrip, so we go back to 30 million years, and then 70 million years, and then 110, and 130, and 145, and so on, and so on, and so on. And then we can consider what the total subsidence is. So the first grain of sediment that arrived 198 million years ago would have started at 0, and the red curve shows its depth of burial as a function of geological time till it gets to its present day depth. We can do that not just for the oldest sediments, but we can do it for every boundary, or we could do it for much finer scale intervals. And typically we will use decompression algorithms in order to try to compensate for thickness of the units changing from when they're deposited as they get compacted to present day. Some of the uncertainty here is the particular ages we assign to the different tops, the paleo water depths that we assign for each time step, the lithologic component, the sands compact differently than silts and shales. And so the amount of decompaction is a function of the lithologic component that we assign. We could have eroded section, and the software typically has ways to handle that. And then we could have something injected like salt or volcanics. So there are some complications that we may have to include in our model. And this, of course, is a one-dimensional model. If we know what the total subsidence of all the deepest, oldest sediments are, that tells us something about how the basin formed and then filled. That total subsidence is a combined effect. It's the tectonic thermal effect of how the basin formed, plus the weight of the sediments that are sitting on top of basement. If we know the stratigraphy, then we can estimate what that weight of sediment effect is, and we can subtract it out. This type of analysis is done for extensional pull-apart Atlantic type margins, where we have gone from a total thickness of continental crust on the order of 35 to 40 kilometers all the way to oceanic crust. And the plot on the bottom is showing the amount of crustal extension, no crustal extension where it's 35 kilometers, 100% extension where the continental crust ends and we go into the continent-ocean boundary and onto oceanic crust. Royden and her co-authors in 1980 published a paper that talked about what sort of subsidence we expect in extensional pull-apart basins if there were no sediments deposited on top of that. Their base case is 100% extension, so how the mid-ocean ridges subside. And then they developed, I think there were 3 different models. The one I tend to use is the dike injection model. And so this is showing geological time and depth. 100% would be where we have oceanic crust. 0% is where we have original thickness of the continental crust. And so the 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 is the fraction to which the continental crust has been thinned. So here's our total subsidence curve once again. We can calculate what the subsidence effect due to only the weight of the sediments is, and that's the yellow. And then the white above the magenta line would be the subsidence, or at least the theoretical subsidence that we would model if there had been no sediment deposition. And then what we can do is we can fit one of those exponential curves on. And so in this case, we get the onset of rifting about 175, 180 million years ago. And the modeled thermotectonic subsidence indicates that the crust has been thinned 70%. That would then allow us to calculate what sort of heat flow we would expect with that particular rifting and sagging phase. So we might have a certain amount of background heat flow, as most of the Earth's crust has. If we know when we've had an extensional event and when that extension started and when we went into the more passive sag, we can calculate how much additional heat is associated with that as a function of geological time. And then we can input this heat history into our software, and it will model temperature through geological time for this one location. We can then calibrate our model. Here we have temperatures versus depth. The black circles are measured values from the well, and the dashed magenta line is what our model has predicted based on our geohistory backstripping and the heat flow analysis that I just walked us through. There's another paleothermometer that we can use. It's called Vitrinite Reflectance. The organic material will have can be examined under a microscope, and we have specialists that will look at pieces of vitrinite and how shiny they are and determine a parameter called vitrinite reflectance. Vitrinite reflectance is shown as R sub 0. That's the symbol for it. And that measures how hot the rocks have been through time. So it's a paleo thermometer for us. So we can also calibrate our temperature model using not just present day temperatures, but we can also use vitrinite reflectance. And so again, here we show vitrinite reflectance on the x-axis, depth on the y-axis. The black circles are the vitrinite reflectance values picked by an expert, and the dashed green line is the modeled vitrinite reflectance given our analysis of the subsidence and the heat flow history. Vitrinite reflectance can also be tied to the oil and gas windows. The oil window starts at about an R0 or vitrinite reflectance of 0.55 and goes to a vitrinite reflectance of about 0.95. And then the gas window starts at 0.95 and goes to 2.2. So we can model several locations, either using actual wells, or with seismic, we can make pseudo wells. We can look at the temperature and vitrinite reflections as a function of depth and how well that is calibrated to our model. And we may be able to come out with depths for the top of the oil window, the top of the gas window, and the base of the gas window. So if we do this at a number of locations and the depths are fairly consistent, then we can use depth maps for our source intervals as a way to tell us where we have oil generation occurring and where we have gas generation occurring. So the source and generation analysis, we would use available data to identify intervals that could be potential source rocks. We would collect total organic carbon, hydrogen index, temperature, and vitrinite reflectance data in and around the area that you're interested in. We would select locations to model the subsidence, fill, and temperature histories using actual well locations where we have the necessary data. And we can also use pseudo wells using seismic-derived stratigraphy. We would run initial models. We would see how those initial models matched our existing temperature data and vitrinite reflectance data. We would make maps to see if everything looks aerially consistent. And that may allow us then to develop a depth versus vitrinite reflectance. And we would use that then to predict, model where we have our source entering into the oil window, where it transitions from the oil window to the gas window, and then where it transitions from the gas window into the overmature window. So there's a number of references here to diagrams or references on the various slides. That's available for you to peruse at your leisure. And I wanted to point out that we won't cover it today, but there is a supplement at the end of this particular lecture, and it's a case study done by myself and a colleague of mine, Oyvind Silta. It was published in 1993, so it's kind of an old study. It's looking at the Norwegian half of the North Sea. For reference, this is the city of Stavanger. Here is Bergen. And we looked at the area shown in white, and we had a number of wells in that location. We had temperature data, we had vitrinite reflection data, we had geological tops and ages, and we went through and modeled there are two main source rocks. We modeled when those source rocks entered into the oil and gas generation windows, and then used that to try to analyze some prospects that had been developed for one of the offshore lease sales. So time doesn't allow me to go through too much. This is for one of the wells. This is the temperature data on the left, the vitrinite reflectance data on the right. The colored symbols are the actual temperature data and the actual vitrinite reflectance data. The blue curve is the model temperature for that location. The dark red is the modeled vitrinite location for the well. Our depth of interest is down in this region where we seem to get a pretty good match, and in this region where we get a pretty good match as well. So I will end it there. Just looking at our syllabus again, we've now covered the first 7 units. We'll talk next Tuesday about reservoir rocks. And a week from today, we'll talk about structure and traps. And I filled out the rest of the summer agenda for us. I will note that there's no webinar going to be given on July 27. I have a previous commitment. So with that, I think I'm ready for questions. I'll turn it back over to our wonderful MC, Danielle.
Thank you so much, Fred. So we have a question that came in already. Could you please explain a little bit more about the role of extinctions in organic matter production and or preservation in slide 8?
Sure. If there is a mass extinction, then we have a lot of organic matter being created. And if we have limited oxygen in our water column, chances are the anoxic conditions are going to be more widespread. So there'll be a thicker anoxic zone, and it will probably last several million years. So the more critters that die, the more likely that we'll have preservation.
Great, thank you. So that was the only question that was written in so far. I can kind of just wait another minute, but to see if there are any more.
Okay.
I don't want there to be like dead air or anything. But I
There's
mean,
probably not too many.
go ahead, go ahead.
There's probably not too many people that normally go to the IRIS website that are geochemists.
Yeah, that's true. And that brings up a good point too, because through our Iris Message Center, that's how you can find out about all upcoming webinars. So if you just Google Iris Message Center, you can find out the link. You can subscribe yourself to that mailing list for all of the upcoming webinars. So including the ones that Fred was just talking about that are scheduled throughout August. So yeah. So no more questions have come through, Fred. Oh wait, one just came through. Is there open source software to do basin analysis?
I am not familiar with what's available in openware. I got out of the basin modeling business 20 years ago and haven't kept up with it. When I worked with ExxonMobil, we had our own in-house software. I know there are a number of vendors that sell the systems that do this type of analysis, but in terms of freeware, I am not sure if there is any that exist. I imagine that you can Google and try to find out what's available out there.
Great. We had another question that came through. Can you explain the Arrhenius equation and how it is used in modeling reaction rates?
Not being a geochemist, I can't really explain it too well. I barely know how to spell it. But essentially, it's equations that the geochemists use so that they can predict when the oil generation will occur, when the gas generation will occur. It does vary a little bit depending on whether you have organic matter type 1 or type 2 or type 3. That's about as far as I feel comfortable commenting.
Okay. We have another question. Can you elaborate on the backstripping method?
Let me get a slide up.
Okay.
Yeah, the backstripping method, some people call it geohistory. It's using the present stratigraphy, and then you systematically remove layer by layer by layer. And so the layers are defined, if you're using well data, by the geological tops and the ages assigned to each top. If you're using seismic data, it's going to be defined by the seismic mapping horizons and the geological ages that you've assigned to those different horizons. And so it's a fairly straightforward calculation of first you have to datum it. In this case, it's datumed as if sea level never changed. It's at present day depth. Then at each time step, let's look at 70 million years as an example. You put in what you think the paleo water depth is at 70 million years, and then all the sediment older than 70 million years goes in, with the one caveat that you want to decompact it for any compaction effects that would have occurred between 7 million years and present day. So if this was drawn accurately, if we looked at the light blue, it would be a little bit thinner, less thick here than at the time of deposition, would be thicker here because after deposition, it got compacted, and so the thickness of the interval gets smaller and smaller.
Great. How frequently is basin modeling / analysis performed? Is it typically only done once for any given play, or are models continually updated as more data is acquired?
The basin modeling is largely an exploration tool. Once you've discovered a field and you're developing the field, you don't really have much use for basin modeling in the sense that I've been talking about it. In the exploration arena, it would be done fairly early when people are first thinking about whether they should bid on an area or not, all the way up to drilling a number of exploration wells. And they will be updated as more information becomes available or as interpretations change or thoughts about what the ages of the different mapping horizons might be. Typically in the prior to a lease sale phase, probably 1D and 2D modeling would be used, not 3D. As more information becomes available, maybe a company owns several blocks, they may get more into 3D basin subsidence, basin analysis, basin modeling.
Great. Well, that's all of the questions. We had some late asking questions. So that's wonderful. Really good questions from everyone. And so with that, this concludes the webinar, and join us next Tuesday for lesson 8. So see you all then. Thank you, Fred.
Yes, I'll see you next Tuesday.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.